In a later section of this book, I intend to show that ancient races the world over recorded pictures of the great god and his circular abode. The images were of the circle inside the bigger circle, and then the cross inside the circle. The second more complete form, showing streams of light radiating from the god to animate his city of heaven. The words which, in the ancient languages, denote this enclosure receive various translations as heaven, cosmos, world, land, earth, netherland, terms which take on vastly different meanings in modern usage. In their original sense, the words signified one and the same thing, a band of light which appeared to set apart the sacred ground of the great God from the rest of space. One cannot begin a survey of the Great Father without confronting his celestial enclosure. But a full discussion of this dwelling will be possible only after certain other aspects of the single God receive clarification. I mention the enclosure now in order to indicate the general and unconventional direction of this investigation. When texts cited in the following pages employ the terms heaven, earth, or world, the reader should know that the usual interpretation will not be my interpretation. Of the Egyptian Atum or Ra, I note these special characteristics. 1. Primeval unity. Atum is the one, but also the all. Though he is the solitary god of beginnings, an assembly of lesser gods emanate from him and revolve in his company. These secondary deities, the Puat or P-A-U-T or circle of the gods, constitute Atum's own limbs. Atum's body is the primeval cosmos, denoted by the circle in the sign. 2. Regulator. Atum is the stationary god, the firm heart of the sky. His hieroglyph, however, is the primitive sledge, signifying to move. As the central light or pivot, he imparts motion to. As the central light or pivot, he imparts motion to, or moves, the heavens, while he himself remains Imhotep, at rest. The celestial motions and the related cycles, he becomes the god of time. 3. The Word. The Egyptians recall Atum as the ancient voice of heaven. The Word came into being. All things were mine when I was alone. I was Ra, Atum, in his final manifestation. The text described the god's first manifestations as the bringing forth of his companions, his limbs, which issue or explode from the god as his fiery speech. This circle of secondary divinities receives the name Ku, K-H-U, meaning words of power, but also brilliant lights or glorious lights. 4. Water god. A well-known character of the Book of the Dead includes this description of Ra. I am the great God who created himself. Who is he? The great God who created himself is the water. It is the abyss, the father of the gods. The great God and the celestial ocean, a lake of fire, are fundamentally one. The waters issue from the God, yet paradoxically give birth to him. 5. The seed. Atum is the masculine power of heaven, the luminous seed embodying all the elements of life, water, fire, air, etc., which flow from him in streams of light. He is the universal source of fertility, animating and impregnating the cosmos. What is most compelling about the portrait of Atum Ra is the numerous Egyptian divinities duplicate the image. The very traits of the great god, outlined above, are endlessly repeated in the figures of Osiris, Ptah, Horus, Khepera, and Amen, each of whom appears as the solitary god in the fiery sea, the God one who brought forth the company of gods as his own limbs, the God of the reverberating speech, the unmoving God producing celestial revolutions, the final source of waters and the impregnating seed of the cosmos, the universal monarch. The same cosmic figure whom the oldest races knew as the creator and supreme god appears in the myths as a terrestrial king, reigning over the Golden Age. His rule was distinguished for its peace and abundance, and he governed not one land alone, but the entire world, becoming the model of the good king. Every terrestrial ruler, according to the kingship rites, received his charisma and authority from this divine predecessor. No mythical figure remains more enigmatic than the great king, to whom so many ancient peoples trace their ancestry. Who was Osiris, the legendary ruler who led the Egyptians out of barbarism and reigned as king of the world? Who was Enki, whom the ancient Sumerians revered as the universal lord and founder of civilization? The same figure appears repeatedly as one passes to India, Greece, China, and the Americas. For the Hindus, it was Yama. For the Greeks, Kronos. For the Chinese, Hong-Ti. The Mexicans insisted that the white god Quetzalcoatl once ruled not only Mexico, but all mankind. In North America, the same idea attached to the primordial figure Manabozho. So vivid are the recollections of the universal monarch that his story usually forms the first chapter in the chronicles of kingship, and the kingship rites meticulously preserve a memory of the god king's rule. Each stage in the inauguration of a new king reenacts the first king's life and death. The rites take the initiated back to the beginning, to the mythical creation. An extraordinary theme emerges in the original age of cosmic harmony and human innocence. The gods dwelt on earth. Presiding over the epoch of peace and plenty was the universal monarch, who founded temples and cities and taught humanity the principles of agriculture, law, writing, music, and other civilized arts. This golden age, however, ended in the god king's catastrophic death. What is most puzzling to modern commentators is that the king of the world, ruling on earth, is at the same time the creator, the god one. How did the ancients come upon this paradoxical notion? The Age of Kronos. Greek legends recall a remote and mysterious era of Kronos, the creator god who, wielding his sickle, ruled from the summit of Olympus, eventually displaced by his own son, against whom he warred violently. Kronos seemed to have appeared to the Greeks as a split personality, at once a radiant god, the very author of the world, and a dark demonic power. But in an old tradition with roots in the earliest antiquity, Kronos is preeminently the good king, his darker side concealed. First of all, the deathless gods who dwell on Olympus made a golden race of mortal men who lived in the time of Kronos, reigned in heaven without sorrow of heart, remote and free from toil and grief. Miserable age rested not on them. The fruitful earth, unforced, bare them fruit abundantly, and without stint. They dwelt in ease and peace upon their lands, with many good things, rich in flocks, and loved by the blessed gods. When Hesiod wrote these lines, the golden age of Kronos was but a faint and often confused memory. To observe antiquity of the idea, one need only refer to the cradles of ancient civilization, Egypt and Mesopotamia. Among the Egyptians, the father of the paradisal age possessed many names, but each tradition proclaimed the same original excellence of creation, subsequently corrupted. The peaceful epoch was distinctly the age of Kronos, under a different title. Throughout their history, the Egyptians believed in a time of perfection at the beginning of the world, observes Clark. In the earliest age, say the Egyptian sources, the great god was the first king, a ruler whose life served as a model for all succeeding ages. With the god king Osiris, the Egyptians constantly associated a vanished golden age. As King Osiris, the beneficent being, taught his subjects to worship the gods, gave them the arts of civilization and city, and disseminating wisdom from one land to another, he became the benefactor of the whole world. But his eventual murder brought worldwide destruction. Among classical writers, Herodotus, Diodorus, Plutarch, the idea prevailed that Osiris lived on our earth as a man, or a man-god. Egyptian sources, too, often portray him in human form. Yet the early religious texts say again and again that Osiris was the supreme light of heaven, ruling from the cosmic center. He was, in fact, the Lord of the gods, God One. His body formed the circle of the Duat, the celestial residence of the gods, and the secondary gods themselves constituted the limbs of Osiris. Indeed, the traditions of Osiris melt into those of Ra and God One, who came into being in primeval time. Just as Osiris' followers remembered his rule on earth, so did other Egyptians recall the terrestrial reign of the creator Ra. To this age, states Lenormant, the Egyptians continually look back with regret and envy to declare the superiority of one thing above all other things imaginable. It was enough to affirm its like had never been since the days of Ra. Its like never had been since the days of Ra. Ra, the father of the gods, reigned over the terrestrial world, but wandered away when the heavens fell into disorder. All chronological tradition affirms that Ra had once ruled over Egypt, writes Budge, and it is a remarkable fact that every possessor of the throne of Egypt has proven, by some means or other, to have the blood of Ra flowing in his veins. But the same belief applied to Horus, the god-king par excellence, as well as Atum, Khepra, Ptah, and Amen. The fact which must be explained is the memory of the creator king and his original age of abundance was far broader than any local tradition, and the story was not limited to Egypt, according to the theologian and historian Eusebius, who relates the account of the Babylonian priest-historian Berosus. The ancient tribes of Chaldea owed their civilization to a powerful and benevolent figure named Onans, who ruled before the deluge. Prior to Onans, the tribes lived without order, like beasts, but the new god-king who issued from the sea instructed mankind in writing and various arts, the formation of cities and the founding of temples. He also taught them to use the use of laws, of bounds, and of division, also the harvesting of grains and fruits, and in short, all that pertains to the mollifying of life he had delivered to men, and since that time nothing more has been invented by anybody. Oans was simply the Greek name for the Babylonian Ea, the Sumerian Enki, worshipped in the cities of Eridu at the mouth of the Euphrates. The tradition dates to the earliest stage of Sumerian history, a time when the myths say that Enki and his wife, Damkina, governed the lost paradise of Dilmun, the pure place of man's genesis. They alone reposed in Dilmun, where Enki and his wife reposed. That place was pure, that place was clean. In Dilmun, the raven croaked not, the kite shrieked not kite-like, the lion mangled not, the wolf ravaged not the lambs. The inhabitants of this paradise lived in a state of near perfection, drinking the waters of life and enjoying unbounded prosperity. Ruling over this favored domain, Enki introduced the civilization to mankind, founded the first cities and temples, and set down the first laws. If, in the account of Berosus, the bringer of civilization appears as a man or part fish, the earlier accounts call him the creator. His home was the cosmic sea, Apsu, the celestial waters of fire, rage, splendor, and terror. The priests of Ea, or Enki, deemed him Momo, the creative word. How about that, Momo? The creative word. Like the Egyptian creator, Enki brought forth the second gods through his own speech. Diverse localities worshipped the same cosmic power under different names. In the ancient city of Lagash, the priests honored the god Ninurta as the father of the paradisal age. Ninurta founded temples and cities, and years of his rule connected with the beginning of the world were years of plenty. Ninurta scaled the mountain and scattered seed far and wide, and the plants, with one accord, named him as their king. The Sumerians themselves knew that Ninurta was the same as the vegetation god, Dumuzi, or Tammuz, son of the Apsu, the shepherd of mankind, whom classical mythology knew as Adonis, and whose catastrophic departure, or death, became the focus of ritual lamentations for many hundreds of years. But Enki, Ninurta, and Dumuzi were only aspects of the creator An, whose ideogram, as previously noted, appears as the earliest Mesopotamian sign of divinity. In all the myths and temple hymns, the Sumerians distinguished the present age from that day, or the days of old, when the gods gave man abundance, the day when vegetation flourished, the supreme figure reigning over his remote age. This remote age was An, the central and highest light, whose foremost epithet was Lugal, king. The Sumerians claim that the very institution of kingship descended from the heaven of An. It was An who produced the beneficent age, which the destiny was fixed for everything that was engendered by An. When An engendered the year of abundance. How widespread was this memory of a golden age, founded and governed by the Creator himself. It appears that the tradition was either preserved in or migrated to every section of the world in Mexico. Legends recount the ancient rule of Quetzalcoatl, who appeared from the sea to become the good and wise ruler of the Tolan in the golden age of Anahuac. The legend describes the god as a lawgiver, teacher of arts, and founder of purified religion. He was the ancestral founding king, and all later Toltec kings considered themselves as direct descendants of Quetzalcoatl. The Toltecs sang. All the arts of the Toltecs, their knowledge, everything came from Quetzalcoatl. The Toltecs were wealthy. Their foodstuffs, their substance cost nothing. They say that the squash were big and heavy, and those Toltecs were very rich. They were very happy. There was no poverty or sadness. Nothing was lacking in their houses. There was no hunger among them. In the story of Quetzalcoatl, one finds the same confusion of man and God as in the legends of Egypt and Mesopotamia. The chronicler Sahagan writes, although this Quetzalcoatl had been a man, they respected him as a god. Indeed, he was the creator, for he made the heavens, the sun, the earth. The Toltecs claim that in the beginning their race knew only one God. Only one God did they have, and they held him as the only God. They invoked him. They supplicated him. His name was Quetzalcoatl. Not only was Quetzalcoatl the giver of life, the evidence proclaims that the first divine generation emanated directly from him. But eventually the god, like his counterparts around the world, suffered a violent fate, bringing to an end his golden age. To the Egyptian, Mesopotamian and American Indian accounts of the remote epoch correspond numerous legends of India, Iran, China, and northern Europe. India, the Hindu Brahma, Yama, Vishnu, and Manu coverage as representatives of a solitary supreme god and creator governing the lost paradise as the first king, setting forth the first moral codes, and imparting to mankind the fundamentals of civilization. Yuma appears as universal lord, Manu as the king of the world, or universal legislator, to whom later monarchs traced their lineage. In the beginning, say the Upanishads, there arose the golden child. As soon as born, he alone was Lord of all. That is, this was Brahma, the one God, the God one. His prosperous epoch, however, ended in his own death and world-destroying conflagration. Iran, Yima, the Iranian transcript of the Hindu Yama, is patriarchal lord of mankind, the brilliant Yima, who first introduced law and civilization to the world. His age knew neither cold nor heat, neither age nor death. So resplendent was his rule that the world assembled around his throne in wonder. Then, when Yima diverged from the path of justice, the glory fled from his kingdom, and he was put to death. Thereupon the eternal spring became a devastating winter. China, in the earliest age, according to the ancient Chinese lore, the purest pleasure and tranquility reigned throughout all nature. Mankind suffered neither hunger, nor pain, nor sorrow. The whole creation enjoyed a state of happiness. All things grew without labor, and a universal fertility prevailed. It was over just such a paradise that the Yellow Emperor, Huang Ti, ruled. Considered the father of the Taoist religion, Huang Ti was the creator, a universal lawmaker and founder of arts and civilization. He was also immortal, and his fruitful era vanished upon his death. Northern Europe. During the Peace of Frodi, a mythical Danish king, no man injured another, and a magical mill ground out peace and plenty for the entire land. Frodi was the Norse god Frey, founder of temples and religious rites, the generous lord under whom peace and fruitfulness abounded, both the lord of the Swedes and god of the world, in the footsteps of the Scandinavian Odin, the creator. Well-being, peace, and good seasons followed. The legends style him the first king, the inventor of arts, and the source of human wisdom. But the age of Frey dissolved in flames, just as Odin and his prosperous kingdom came crashing down in the fires of Ragnarok. Here, then, is a worldwide motif, deeply ingrained in the religious and historical records of all principal races. The idea of Edenic happiness of the first human beings constitutes one of the universal traditions, states Lenormant. Ministering over his age is the universal monarch. While extolled as the solitary supreme god and the creator of the world, he yet appears as a ruler on earth, the ancestor of terrestrial kings. By his teaching, mankind rose from barbarism. But in the end, the god met a catastrophic fate, and his death or departure brought a violent termination of the First World Order. The rites of kingship. The ritual surrounding ancient kings amounts to a summary of ancient beliefs about the universal monarch. For every local sovereign was the successor and representative of the great god, who ruled the world during the Golden Age. The rites of kingship testify to the enormous power which the collective memory of this god-king held over later generations. Chronicles of kingship from Egypt to Mesopotamia to Persia to China to Italy to northern Europe to pre-Columbian Mexico all trace the line of kings back to the first king. a supreme cosmic deity who founded the kingship rights. When history begins, there are kings, the representatives of the gods, states Hokart. No greater mistake could be made by historians than to assume that the sovereignty of kings grew out of economic or material concerns. Instead, the crucial forces were religious. The king was a product of ancient ritual, and the ritual centered on cosmic beliefs, which for several millennia could not be shaken loose. To comprehend the mighty influence of kingship in the ancient world, one must penetrate the mystery of the king's prototype, the universal monarch. In the first king's life and rule originated the prerogatives and obligations of all local sovereigns. It was the duty of every king to perform the rites instituted by the great God in the beginning, and to renew, if only symbolically, the primordial era of peace and plenty. In the ritual, the king turns the wheel of law, first turned by the great God, rides on the god's own cosmic ship, takes spouse the great mother, mistress of the great father, builds temples and cities patterned after the god's celestial abode, and subdues the forces of darkness, barbarians, just as the god defeated chaos in the beginning. Whatever the marvels of the great father, is the duty of each local king to repeat them, or at least ritually to reenact these accomplishments, as if he were the great god himself. In his study of kingship in Egypt, Henry Frankfurt tells us that the great god was the first king. Whether named Ra, Khepri, or Atum, he is the prototype of Pharaoh, and the texts abound in phrases drawing the comparisons to certify his authority as a successor of the universal monarch. The king credits himself with having introduced the age of abundance, like that of ancestral sovereign. Thus, Thutmose III not only sits upon the throne of Atum, but claims to have achieved what had not been done since the time of Ra, and have restored conditions as they were in the beginning. Amenhotep III strives to make the country flourish as in primeval times. Similarly, when the Sumerian king Dungi ascended the throne, the people supposed that a champion had arisen to restore the paradise which existed before the flood, but was lost through transgression. Each king states Alfred Germanius, primeval king. Each king states Alfred Germanius was expected to reproduce the wonders of the great god, the primeval king. Thus does Ansabernerpal proclaim that upon his ascension to the throne, Raman has sent forth his rain. The harvest was plentiful, the corn was abundant, the cattle multiplied exceedingly. Among the Hebrews, every king is a Messiah, and at times the hope is expressed that the king will introduce a new golden age. Each is the test of the just or good ruler, who brings prosperity and a fruitful earth. This belief, which seems to have held sway over the entire ancient world, receives insufficient attention from historians. It points directly to an extraordinary memory of the universal monarch. Consider Homer gives as the ideal a blameless king whose fame goes up to the wide heaven, maintaining right, and the black earth bears wheat and barley, and the trees are laden with fruit, and the sheep bring forth and fail not, and the sea gives store of fish, and all from his good guidance, and the people prosper. Can this be anything other than the lost age of Kronos? Why should a fertile soil confirm the righteousness of kings? The connection becomes clear once one takes the universal monarch as more than an esoteric fiction, and recognizes him as the shaping force behind the ideals of kingship. Just as peace and plenty followed in the footsteps of the first ideal good king, they should follow those of his successors who share the charisma of the great predecessor. The further we go back in history, observes Young, the more evident does the king's divinity become. And in the Near East, the whole essence of kingship was based far more on theological than political considerations. It was self-evident that the king was the magical source of welfare and prosperity, and for the entire organic community of man, animal, and the plant. From him flowed life and prosperity of his subjects, the increase of the herds, and the fertility of the land. This image of the local king is drawn directly from the image of the universal monarch. Thus did the ancient ruler call himself king of the world, and claim to radiate power and light. Thompson tells us that the Mayan ruler declared himself as something like king of kings, ruler of the world, regent on earth of the great Itzamna, a sort of divine right of kings, which would have turned James I green with envy. Walt Thompson calls an inflated notion of grandeur, seems to characterize all ancient kings, who shine like the sun and direct the heavenly motions. But the reason must be appreciated. Every king was, in a magical way, the universal monarch reborn. The institution and ritual of kingship point to the same great God and the same golden age, as do the myths of cosmic beginnings. And what historical conditions did this collective memory originate? And if the universal monarch governed the entire heavens as God one, why was he called an ancestor? The subchapter, The Heaven Man, would be next.